California called the Branson School. And Peter wasn't in the best of shape at that point. Neither was I, but although I'd gotten a little help. And Peter and I worked together and became very close friends. And over the years, that friendship has endured, although we rarely get to see each other. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this tonight was just a chance to be with an old friend. I also got to spend some time with Peter and his wife and 3 children and his incredibly wonderful dog named Spike at a farmhouse in Burgundy this summer. He's a special man, and he's here because not only is he the director of emergencies director, it is called, at Human Rights Watch, a division which he founded, but because he was a close friend of Tim Hetherington. And it's in that wise that I want him to talk to you about his friendship with Tim and then to take any questions that you might have of him. So I'm not going to go through a lengthy biography except to say that he left Branson School much better than he arrived. He went off to UC Santa Barbara and then to Stanford Law School and then to do the work that has so distinguished him with Human Rights Watch. Peter Bouckaert.
Thank you. I'm not going to talk about Ted and I because then I'll get all emotional. So.
Me. Ted and me. Sorry.
I'm Belgian, so
I know you.
Anyway, my work at Human Rights Watch is about documenting human rights abuses and war crimes and crimes against humanity in war zones. It's very different, or a little bit different from what you saw in the movie. I don't have to always be on the front line taking the kind of pictures that Tim had to take. A lot of our work is talking to eyewitnesses and the victims of war farther away from the front line. But oftentimes we do find ourselves in the same kind of places, because the program I started at Human Rights Watch was all based on the idea that we have to break through the fog of war to bring the truth to policymakers and to the world about what's happening in places like Kosovo, where I started, northern Uganda with the Lord's Resistance Army, and today in Syria. So to do that, to bring you the reality of what's happening in these places, we do have to take a lot of risks. And we also, Human Rights Watch from the very beginning understood that you have to use multimedia, that we have to use photographs and video to bring our message to people. So really one of the big challenges for our work and for what Tim was doing and why Tim became one of my closest friends and a collaborator on so many projects is that we face the same challenge. And that's to make you care about what's happening in these places, to make you understand that what's happening in Rwanda or Syria today matters to us, that there's people out there suffering, undergoing terrible trials because of what is happening in those countries, and also that there's something that we can do about it. And that's something that Tim really cared about, to try to make a difference. And maybe I think that's one of the shortcomings of the documentary, is that it focuses a lot on the bang bang because it's dramatic. But Tim didn't really care all that much about the bang bang. He cared a lot more about the kids at the school for the blind in Liberia, which is one of the places where his legacy is ongoing, because after his death, his parents created a foundation partly for the School of the Blind, partly for Human Rights Watch, to carry on the work he's done. Tim and I were born the same year, and when you spend a lot of time under the kind of conditions that you see in the film to bring the story to you about what's happening in those places, just like the bonds that people in the movie describe between soldiers, we also form. Because when you work in these very intense conditions, you cannot hide your personality. You can see right through a person's soul. And that's why we do form these incredible bonds. I was actually on Skype with the hospital in Misrata, with the photographer who's in the documentary saying how they were in front of the rebels and how it angered him. I was on Skype with that photographer when Tim and Chris and the other wounded came into the hospital. So I was the first to find out outside Misrata what had happened. And in his impeccable English, Andre first sent a message saying, "Oh man, a shit happened. Some journalist got wounded and Tim is bad." And I hadn't even known Tim had gone back 2 weeks before. We had been together in Libya and he left in a lot of frustration. And so I messaged back saying, "Tim who? Tim Hetherington?" And he messaged back saying, "Yes, Tim, and he just died." So I was left with the very difficult obligation of trying as quickly as possible to inform his girlfriend, Sebastian, and everybody else that Tim was gone. Because we didn't want them to find out on the radio. We wanted them to find out from somebody they loved, who loved him. And then after that was done, I sat in front of my computer in Geneva till 3 o'clock in the morning, working with UNICEF and IOM and many others to get their bodies onto that ship so they could be buried back with their families. And the final duty, if you want to call it, is that the night before Tim was buried, I gave his parents his camera from Misrata, the camera he'd been carrying, through which he saw the world. So we worked together for more than a decade, and that was a form of closure of this very horrible incident. Anyway, I'll open it up for questions then. Thanks.
One of those last shots that was in the movie of the sky as Tim, like after Tim like got hit by the mortar or the shrapnel, was that his camera or was that another photojournalist's camera that was filming that?
So the footage that you see from Libya, there were 4 photographers in the car, and there also was a Libyan citizen journalist who was filming. And that's why you can kind of see how it goes from bad quality to good quality and back to bad quality, because some of it is actually shot on like smartphones and not so smartphones. But you know, one of the photographers who was wounded, he was a young kid just out of college, and he arrived in Misrata with just an iPhone, and that's all he was using. A lot of his footage is in the film, and a lot of the professional photographers were really angry with him. They said, you know, why do you risk your life to take pictures with an iPhone? At least get some professional gear. Which was probably pretty good advice. Luckily he survived. He was wounded in the shoulder, and I had to get him on a boat. Very young guy, and you know, he said, no, I'm just gonna stay here and get better. And I said, if you don't get on this boat, I'm gonna make sure you don't get on any other boat out of here. You're gonna be swimming back to Benghazi. So finally we did get him on the boat. Don't be shy now.
No.
Come on, I know you have lots of questions. Yes?
Peter, can you explain then how your emergencies division has sort of changed the way Human Rights Watch approaches sort of exposing human rights abuses?
So I started working at Human Rights Watch in 1997, just out of law school. I really had no idea what Human Rights Watch was doing at the time, but they gave me a job. And soon thereafter they sent me to Kosovo. And at the time, the Serbian military was basically engaged in a campaign of ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. And we found ourselves, like Tim, on the front lines of this war. We wouldn't go where the fighting was, but we would go after the Serbian soldiers left to see what had happened. And day after day, we found ourselves in these burning villages. The houses were still on fire. And the bodies were laying on the ground, people executed by the Serbian military. just for being ethnic Albanians. And at that time we decided, what we were seeing and the methodology of the human rights movement just weren't in touch with each other. Because at the time, the human rights movement was very conservative. It was mostly coming out of experience documenting torture and political repression. And they really weren't used working in war zones. And we felt that our job was to save lives and not just to document the killings afterwards. And that writing these big reports that would come out 6 months later or something just wasn't relevant to what we were seeing in front of our eyes. So we reinvented the methodology of Human Rights Watch. We kept the same standard of excellence because the only thing we have as a human rights organization, we don't have an army to tell governments what to do. We have our reputation. So we have to get things 100% right all the time. But we decided just to do things more quickly. If we've documented a massacre that day and we had the names of the people and we had multiple eyewitness accounts of what had happened, we would put something out that night. And that's what we've been doing since. But it also means that to do that kind of documentation, we have to place us where things are happening. And it does expose us to the kind of dangers you see in the movie. But it also exposes us to witnessing a tremendous amount of suffering. We meet with people in the darkest moments of their lives, after they've lost relatives, after they've been raped, after their village has been bombed and destroyed, when they're on the move with just a bag of belongings because everything else is gone. And that's difficult. You have to pay attention to people when they're talking to you. And you have to look at their emotions and make sure that you're not re-traumatizing them. But it's also a very unique experience to be there as a source of hope for people in the darkest moment of their lives. It's what keeps me going. People ask me, why do you do this crazy job going to places where you could get killed? And I tell them, first of all, that I'm very careful. I have 3 kids, and I don't want to end up in a situation like Tim. That's very important. You can use your head also to keep you much more safe, but also because I know the difference that we make in the world, and that it's important that we're there. And it doesn't matter, Human Rights Watch works in schools in California on the rights of LGBT kids, for example, from harassment. We work in the prison systems in California about kids who've been sent to life without parole. We've changed those laws. So we do this not just in war zones, but on issues across the board. Yes.
I think it's really unbelievable sort of how brave Tim was and how he really did understand the dangers of war, but he continued to go back and continued to go back. Do you think there's anything that could have stopped him, maybe if he had gotten injured before getting killed or anything like that?
I think what happened to Tim is we were together in Benghazi 2 weeks before in a situation where the front line was much farther away and we were not exposed to the kind of danger he ended up going back to in Misrata. And he had just come back from Restrepo and he was looking for his next project. And I think he just misread the situation on the ground. Because it's true, 2 weeks before, he was talking about, I have this girlfriend, we're doing so well. What's it like to have kids and start a family? Can I continue this work? And I was telling him, yeah, you can. I mean, I had 2 kids at the time, I have 3 now. And, there's so much work out there that you don't have to be on the front lines. So I think it was more an issue of him misreading the situation. And you are lulled into a false sense of security because of the crowd you're traveling with. And there is an attraction to the front line. I mean, it's like a moth being attracted to a flame. And that's what I tell people all the time. You have to understand that attraction, because if you don't understand, you're going to be the one getting burned by the flame. And that's not our job. dead photographers don't take good pictures. You know, you have to use your mind to stay safe, whatever you do. Yes.
Based on, I mean, your experiences, especially in Kosovo and Tim's in West Africa and Afghanistan, all that, I feel like, especially watching this, there's almost like a personal guilt added on from being in my little bubble here, you know, and I see what's going on all around the world, and I'm just curious about, as somebody who's been there and who's been on the front lines and who's seen it all, how do you cope with this, and how should we, as, you know, this really distanced, you know, whole different world, how should we, you know, view it, and how should we cope with it?
Look, it's not that different, the world. I mean, Tim and I both went to the same kind of high school that you're going to. But let me tell you a few things. First of all, from now on, when you watch the news and read the newspaper or surf the web, think about where these pictures are coming from and what price people are paying to bring them to you, the risks that they have to take to bring you the news. And invest a little bit in the quality of news. Support quality news gathering, because it's important. People take tremendous risks to keep you informed as the public. You know, and our news business is collapsing. A lot of newspapers are laying off people. So it's important that we as a public support the news business, because otherwise we will be worse informed. You can't blog about what's going on in Syria. People have to go and report about what's going on in Syria. So that's the first. And secondly, you don't need to take the kind of risks that myself and Tim and others take to get that information out there, but you can try to make a difference. You know, there's a million ways in which you can make a difference. We have a student task force in many of the high schools in LA. Westlake is one of the few which is not yet part of the task force, but I'm sure soon will be. And this year, they take on a campaign every year, and their campaign this year is about making education safe in war zones. You know, preventing schools from being used as military bases, preventing students from being abducted and turned into child soldiers, and preventing schools from being bombed. And they do it from here. And I was just talking to your teacher about doing a video maybe to go along with that campaign. Those are the kind of differences you can make. And you do need to lead a life where you feel you're making a difference towards making this a better world. And it doesn't matter whether you do it in my way as a full-time job, or if you focus on global warming and living an environmentally responsible life. All those things make a difference, and they make you a better human being and a more satisfied human being, in my opinion. Yes?
When in your life did you figure that out?
I'm still learning, you know? I figured it out. I think I go...
Was there a moment? Was there a certain age? Was there...
You know, the reason why I support movies like this is because I want people to stop thinking about what we're doing as extraordinary. I think it's very important that we all have that feeling that we can make a difference, and that we embrace that as an essential part of our nature. But I go back to my law school reunions, and I see a lot of frustrated people in corporate lives. And I have nothing against corporate careers. I mean, some of my best friends are corporate lawyers. But, you know, what I think they're learning now, being in their 40s, is that they're rebalancing their lives to take on more of a social responsibility. And they're much more satisfied doing that. Yes?
There's a part of the movie where the soldiers in Afghanistan tell Tim to turn off his camera. Do you ever find it hard to balance providing the information that you do without crossing the line of invading privacy and exploiting your subjects?
You know, it's a problem that people who work with cameras and video constantly face. And I think it's really good that they put it in this documentary, because normally you don't see it because the camera's turned off. And it doesn't make for good television. But as a human rights activist, it's a situation I barely ever have come across. Because people depend on us. and they know why they're there. You know, you think that I'd have to explain constantly what Human Rights Watch is about when I'm out there in Syria or the West Bank or Chechnya or Afghanistan? No. I tell people I'm from Human Rights Watch, and they start telling their story before I've even asked them if it would be okay for me to ask them some questions. Because they understand that there's people out there trying to help them.
Tim talks in the film about using his work, and by extension your work, as a way of exposing and kind of showcasing the capital T truth of warfare and conflict, and kind of rising above some of the myopia of mainstream media. What are some ways that you think that mainstream media can get better at talking about these sorts of situations, and that we as an audience can be more informed?
Well, for that, you'd have to see some of Tim's work from Darfur. I mean, look up on YouTube, Darfur Bleeds, for example. And you should also watch his 20-minute mini documentary diary, which is featured a little bit. Because I think what made Tim very unique is that each of his projects had its own feel and its own way to tell the story. I mean, for example, Darfur Bleeds starts by somebody saying in Arabic all the names of the people who were killed in this village raid. But you don't realize it when it begins. You just hear these Arabic names, and it's only after a while that you realize it's about a massacre. And that's the art of storytelling. And it's really important for me as an activist to understand that art, because if I always tell the same story, I'm just going to bore the hell out of you. And every conflict will look the same. And that's what our news does to us. I think it actually deadens us to the reality of what's happening out there oftentimes, because it's the same every night. I mean, okay, it can be a car bombing in Iraq or car bombing in Syria, but the images are the same and the storyline is the same. When for us working in these conflicts, it's really always very different. I mean, I hope you felt that Liberia was very different from Afghanistan and Libya. And that's important. You know, I think we're kind of, it's like the news is McDonald's style almost, you know. You can order a Big Mac or a Mac chicken, but it kind of tastes the same if you close your eyes after the second bite, you know. And news shouldn't be that way.
First of all, I highly recommend everyone watch Restrepo. It's a really great film.
Hear, hear.
I thought this film was so well edited, and the storytelling was wonderful. And when Emma asked the question about that's part of Restrepo when the soldier died, and Tim was telling the story in this film, and you heard someone sobbing, and I assumed that was him sobbing. But I thought it was an interesting choice that we never saw his face in that section, that the editor decided to stay on the Restrepo shots, that sort of details of the blood and the, and it was just, I just was surprised. I don't know how intimate you were with the process of editing this piece.
I was.
Okay. Can you talk about the decision to not show Tim crying?
Yeah, you know, we want the audience to be thinking, and there's so many moments like that. I mean, there's the moment where they're about to execute the doctor, and James Brabazon says, you know, I had seen other executions, so I just panned to a wide shot, you know? And I mean, that must be the coldest moment in the movie.
Exactly.
Well,
He's the co-producer, you know?
And we never saw the
We
wide
never
shot.
saw the wide shot.
Yeah, we never
Yeah.
So I was surprised
Yeah.
with
We
that.
also didn't see Tim stepping in.
Yeah. So, you know, it actually took me only at the end of the sobbing scene to realize that it was Tim sobbing. And I think for most of the audience, you don't know if it's a soldier or Tim. And I think a lot of this is deliberate because, yeah, I mean, it could have just as well been one of the soldiers sobbing, but we also are there sharing the pain. And I mean, as I said in the movie, I think that's, you know, when we got Tim's body and Chris's body out of there, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. and I went to bed, and I got woken up at 6 by a phone call, and it was the Africa command of the U.S. military. I don't know how they got my number, or I didn't know at the time, but now I do know, thanks to Snowden. And they said, "Is this Peter Bouckaert?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Hold on, the general wants to talk to you." And it was the father of one of the Restrepo soldiers. And he said, "You know, we heard about Tim, and I just wanted to know, we got ships, we got assets," he called them. "We got assets offshore. If you guys need anything, we can step in." And I was like, "Well, thank you, sir, but he's already on his way to Benghazi and is taken care of." And he said, "I just want you to know he's one of us too." Wow. You know, and the ability of Tim to tell the story of a group of soldiers with the same humanity of telling the story of, you know, what's happening to civilians in Darfur, that's really special. And we should. I don't think we ever got to that point in Vietnam of understanding just what our soldiers were going through on the ground, whatever we felt about the war. I mean, I wasn't even born, so I gotta ask somebody like that, but in fiction maybe, but never really, you know, the way that Restrepo tells the story. Yes.
What do you think, in that pursuit of transparency, what do you think of the work of Julian Assange or Snowden?
You know, we had a lot of problems with Assange especially, because we knew that in the State Department files that he released that there were a lot of names of human rights activists who exposed human rights abuses in their country at the various U.S. embassies. And we reached out to Assange about that. And he was very cold about it. I mean, he called them collaborators with the U.S. government. And we were like, you know, actually they're like human rights activists risking their lives in their country, trying to get the international community to do about it. So it wasn't a very good kind of relationship from the beginning. I mean, I think that the debate that they've sparked in terms of what our government is doing is very important. I think it's wrong to have a witch hunt against these people and to try to put them away for life just to kind of kill the whistleblower role. But they're not always the very nicest people in terms of their motivations for doing these kind of things. But I think it is really important that we have these discussions about what they've revealed, and that we have them openly and transparently. Yes, sir.
In the places you've been and the things you've seen, do you get a feeling of just hopelessness that we're ever going to get above this kind of thought, this kind of activity, that it's inherent in human nature that this is going to go on because of the way individuals feed on these conflicts?
You know, it is very scary to be confronted with our dark nature, to see people actually embrace killing each other and using tremendous violence, and even entire crowds. You know, I've been in Macedonia, for example, watching policemen beat people and have a crowd of hundreds of people gather around clapping and cheering on, and women going up and kissing the soldiers and all of this stuff. Like, it is a scary thing to see. And it is part of our nature. But I think that we can also have the mechanisms to control that nature, and to deter it. And I think the mechanisms of international justice are really important for that. You know, I've also seen people fight with great reluctance. I mean, most of the fighters in Libya, most of the fighters in Syria, they were first protesters. They tried to achieve what they wanted in non-violent ways. You know, there's the scene at the beginning where everybody's saying Selmiya, Selmiya. Selmiya means peaceful. And then they were gunned down. So, yes, I've seen a lot of violence in my life and I've seen people really enjoy violence, and it's one of the most disturbing things you can see. But I've also seen the impact of non-violent movements. And I think we can do things to encourage that good side of our nature against the dark side.
In all the places that you've been in during your career as Human Rights Watch activist, where has been the place where you've been the most scared for your life?
LA, definitely. No, look, all of these situations are so different, and the reality is that for me and for Tim, when you do this professionally, fear doesn't really become part of it anymore. It's our reality. And even when the shooting is happening, you're just so busy trying to survive that it's not really about fear, which is a dangerous thing as well. But yeah, it's just our reality.
I'm wondering, as someone who's sent to document war and be put in, surrounded by what's happening, I guess, where do you sort of draw the line between being an observer and being someone kind of like what Tim did, who goes and tries to change what's happening? It's unfair, not just.
Look, for me, accomplishing that change is the core of my job. I don't go to these places just to document the suffering. I try to stop the killings and to bring about consequences of justice under those circumstances. And that's also one of the sources of satisfaction of my work. But that's very different from taking a solidarity position. I mean, in places like Syria, we document abuses by the opposition as well as abuses by the government. So, I see a lot of young people going to Palestine, for example, to join the international solidarity movement. And they get angry with me when I come and document abuses committed by the Palestinians, and I tell them, no. We have to hold everybody to the same level, and especially peoples whose aspiration we support. We should hold them to even a higher level, because these struggles for human rights are about honor and dignity. And when they engage in killings and other abuses, first of all, it sets bad habits, but it also defeats the very purpose why they launch these movements. So I hold no apologies for going and documenting the killing of Gaddafi and Gaddafi loyalists that terrible day in Syria. I went to see the rebels who did it the next day and told them, this is not what your revolution is about, and we're going to write a report about it.
One final question. Jacob?
How can you go from the kind of stuff that you and Tim do and the reality, you say how it becomes your reality, and you, in West Africa, you see kids that are your own kids' age with AK-47s bigger than them, trying to kill each other. How can you come back to Los Angeles and be the same person, or maybe not the same person, but how can you even deal with this stupid economic BS that we deal with every day?
Well, he lives in Geneva.
Yeah, we don't got that, and we don't have traffic either. No, but that's what I said in the movie. I was the guy with the shirt. Yeah. They hadn't seen me before, so I want to make sure they remember.
Right. Absolutely.
It's a lot more difficult to leave these places and to adjust back to normal life, because the work you're doing there is so intense and so important. But I don't want to live my life as a jerk when I come home and be like, all the stuff you guys care about is bullshit because I just came back from Syria. I mean, some people do it and they don't end up with a whole lot of friends at the end of the day. But it is a really difficult adjustment. I mean, honestly, I was in Santa Barbara yesterday talking at a country club where the initiation fee is $300,000, and that is a weird experience. Talking about Syria there. But if I don't adjust to that life, if I don't spend my evenings cooking for my kids and listening to them, it makes me sick. And so this work, it's my career, but it's not my life. My life is also with my family and my kids. And when I'm home, I leave my office at 6 o'clock and I cook dinner for my kids, and our weekends on the farm. Whatever you do in life, please have a little bit of balance, you know? Because I see a lot of people, they make their career their lives, and it's a very narrow definition of your life. Have hobbies, enjoy relationships, enjoy your family, because that's just as important as your career. And find a career you love, but still, it's your career, it's not your life.
And the greatest career other than Peter's is teaching and seeing your former students come out this nicely. Thank you.
I was going to say it's also nice to see your teachers grow bald, but he's always been
You didn't hear the last part. He's always been bald, is what he just said. Since you've known me, that is true.
We used to call him Egghead.
Yes. Enough.
I just want to make sure that name transferred.
Yeah, it didn't until now. Thank you all. You've been a wonderful audience, and I think you know why we work so hard to make this happen. I hope you do. Thank you.